In this chapter, we're going to demonstrate how you can use the controls and classes in the .NET Framework 3.5 to handle image display. We'll also delve into more advanced functionality within the System.Data namespace. Let's start by launching Visual Studio 2008 to see the progress we made so far. Select Visual Studio 2008 and select File, Open, Project. Go to your desktop directory. Inside the Project Files Chapter 7, you'll find the solution file for the project we've been working on. Double-click that to open the project file. Let's run the application to see what kind of functionality we need to add here. Press F5. Select the Create Item button. As you remember, we created a connection to the database to pull item data into this form. We used both a binding source to navigate through our data as well as a visual control, the binding navigator, to scroll through all our items. Keep in mind now, these items all have one or many images associated to them. We certainly don't see them now. We'll need to add some controls to bind to the images coming from the database. The images are stored in the database in a var binary format. Visual Studio 2008 is capable of picking up that multimedia image format and displaying it in a control very similar to the way we handled plain text, integers, and dates. Let's give that a try. Go back to Visual Studio, select Stop to stop the application. Navigate to the Data Sources window. Here we see a list of all data sources that we've added so far. Notice we don't have anything dealing with images. Let's go ahead and change that. Select the Add New Data Source option. Select Next again, and here we have a list of database objects we can select from. Let's try something different this time. Instead of only using one table, let's use multiple tables. Select all the tables that are associated with image. Of course, we'll want the image table, but we'll also want the link tables, image grouping, and item image. Image grouping provides a relationship between the image table and the grouping table. The item image table allows us to associate items to particular images. We'll add all three of these. The SQL Server database has already relationships between these tables. It has a foreign key relationship from the primary table, image, to the child tables, image grouping and item image. The Visual Studio Designer is intelligent enough to interpret these relationships and reflect them in the database designer using controls. Let's take a look at what that looks like. Change the dataset name to be DS Images. As you remember, a dataset can have one or many data tables. So the tables that we select from SQL Server will now translate into multiple data tables inside of our parent dataset. Press Finish. Double-click on the DS Images XSD file in your Solution Explorer. This will launch the Dataset Designer. As you can see, Visual Studio automatically created the relationships between these data tables, using the relationships created inside SQL Server. And on the left-hand side in our Data Sources window, we also now see our DS Images table. Nested below that are our three data tables. By default, each of our table adapters have fill methods to generically fill all the data from the database into our data table. In our case, as you remember, when we navigate through each item, we want to display the image that's related to that particular item. So just doing a regular fill wouldn't be enough for us. We want to be able to pass it some criteria or a parameter that allows the data to be filtered based on an item ID. Let's add this functionality to the image table adapter. From your toolbox, select Query and then drag that onto the image table adapter. This will launch the Query Configuration Wizard. We can walk through this fairly quickly as we've already worked with this in the previous chapter. Select Next again, and now let's go ahead and add a few more tables. We want to take advantage of the relationships that we have with this associated link table, the item image table. Go to Query Builder, right-click, select Add Table. Add the table, item image. Close the Add Table dialog box. As you can see, we now have an inner join between our link table and our image table. Select OK. Now let's add a where clause. we want to do a where based on item ID. Type in where itemImage.itemID equals item ID. You see, any item that doesn't have an image associated to it will not be listed in the item image table. Only those items that have images will be listed in this table. So that's why we want to pull the item ID filter from the item image table, not from the item table, as the item table will have all the items, whether they have a picture or not. Select Next. Uncheck the Get Data By and modify the Fill By method to read Fill Images by Item ID. Press Finish to finish the query. We'll also need functionality to insert images. Right-click, select Add Query. Select SQL Statements, select Insert to add a new row to the table. Let's modify the query. We certainly don't need all the rows returned to us. All we need is the primary key of the row just added. Change the select to read select @ identity. Remember, this is a handy performance tip. Why return unnecessary data when all you simply need is a single value? And as you remember, ADO.NET can configure your command so you only return a single value back from the database rather than consuming more bandwidth with extra data. Select Next. Let's give this a name and call it Insert Image and Return P Key. Select Next and select Finish. Don't forget to change the Properties window from non-query to scalar. The next thing we want to add is a method, Fill Images by Image ID. That way we can retrieve the image data based on the unique identifier for images. Let's go ahead and do that. Right-click on the image table adapter and select Add Query. Select Next, Next again, and let's go ahead and add a where clause. Type in where image ID equals @image ID. Select Next. Uncheck the Get Data By. Modify the Fill By to read Fill Images by Image ID. Select Finish. Now let's configure our other data tables. Go to the Item Image table. We don't need to worry about image grouping for now. In order to add an image to our database, we not only have to populate the image table using the Insert Image method, but we also need to add a row inside our item image to associate that item to a particular image. We have a separate table for this so that we can have a one-to-many relationships between our item and our images. If we had stored the item ID directly in the image table, this would cause our database to be fairly denormalized and actually store redundant data. So, in order to provide this functionality, let's go ahead and add an item image insertion method. Right-click, select Add Query. Select SQL Statements, select Insert, select Next. Modify the returning select statement to be returning the primary key. Type in @identity, select Next, change the name of the query to be Insert Item Image and Return P Key. Press Finish. That's it. We've configured the basic functionality for returning images and inserting images. Let's save all our changes and close the DS Images file.